Connected with Cari. I'm just going to make sure we're live on all sides here. Here we go. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Connected with Cari here this beautiful first Saturday of March, and also happens to be, actually, this is the second Saturday in March, is it not? I don't know anymore. I've lost track of time because I spent all day, the past day today and yesterday, on Women's Day International Summit. So I am computer dazed right now, but welcome to Connected with Cari here on the International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day to all you women out there, and to those men who support women. We truly thank you from the bottom of our hearts for supporting us and loving us and doing all the men things behind the women things. We appreciate you. So I don't have a woman guest. She was unable to come, my original guest, so that's okay. On with me is Ed. Don't do that. So he was supposed to be on in, like, I called you Ed because I was looking at your last name. Ken. Ken was booked at the end of March, but he was wonderful to be able to up his interview and come on today, which I'm truly thankful for. So thank you, Ken, for coming on this show. Please do an introduction. I always say do a quick introduction. But as I say quick introduction, everyone does this 30-second elevator pitch, and then that's it. And I'm like, well, that's nice and all, but, you know, this isn't like an elevator.
No, not quite as crowded.
Not quite as crowded, although we are kind of a little bit crowded in our space here, but that's okay. So please formally introduce yourself, who you are,
Okay.
and all the things, because we want to get into, I just want to have the audience kind of figure out who you are, what your little past is leading into what you are doing now.
Okay. Well, as she said, Ken Edmonds is my name, and I have been, I have done a lot of things in my life. Let's just say it that way. Everything from being in the military, air traffic control, owning a copier dealership, and then I spent the last 20 years of my career working for the manufacturers. So I worked for Sharp and then Konica Minolta as a district service manager. And my job, in fact, when my boss hired me at Sharp, he said, if I catch you with a screwdriver in your hand, I'm going to break your arm. And the point he was making is that it wasn't my job to fix equipment. It was my job to fix the dealership and fix the technician, find out why they couldn't fix equipment. And so I spent 20 years doing that. I got to see some of the very best dealerships in the United States and some of the very worst. I had the territory nobody wanted, because I had North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and the Wisconsin, and the UP of Michigan. So it was the place nobody else wanted to go. You know, we had winters like we were in Canada, way north in Canada sometimes. And
welcome.
And my territory was in driving. So I drove around all of those areas, even in the wintertime. I flew one time to see a dealer, and I could have driven faster because we had a blizzard going on, and I got snowed in Denver, and then we flew from Denver to some little field. It was like a Quonset hut, and the strip was paved, but that was all there was there, is this Quonset hut and this strip out in the middle of Nebraska. So mostly I drove. I got to see a lot of the territory out there. But like
what did you do? What did you do with the dealership? And just sales, or did you?
No, I was a technical guy. I helped them figure out how to fix equipment. I helped them to figure out why they couldn't fix equipment. Sometimes there was an issue. There was a problem with the machine that came from the factory, and so I'd report that back. Yeah. But most of the time, it was that the technicians didn't really know how to troubleshoot. And so I spent a great deal of time teaching them how to troubleshoot. And it was funny because when I first started, I was going from one machine to the other for about the first 6 months. And I built a troubleshooting course. And as I started teaching the technicians to troubleshoot, I didn't have to fix nearly as much equipment. You know, I helped them learn how to fix it themselves, you know, kind of teach them to fish things. And so I got to spend a lot more time working with the service manager, trying to figure out what are the things that they could do to become better and become more profitable. Because really that's the focus, is how do you do things in a way to become more profitable? And I got to see dealers that were really good at it, and I learned from them. And I saw, like I said, saw the dealers that weren't, and I learned from them. So I started building up, let's say, a mental knowledge base of things that really worked and things that didn't. I
So
was fortunate.
what were a couple of the things that most of the dealerships had an issue with?
Well,
Did you
like I said,
what was like the
troubleshooting was
main thing?
troubleshooting was the main thing, because the techs would go out and they wouldn't know what was wrong with the machine. And so I describe it like this: they would load their parts shotgun and they'd back up and start shooting at the machine till they hit something, which is a very expensive way for the dealership, very frustrating for the technician, frustrating for the customer.
Yeah, because they would be in the shop a lot longer than anticipated, instead of plugging into like a diagnosis machine going, okay, this is your problem, and it scans it within a couple minutes, right? So
no, they didn't have a diagnosis machine other than what was up here.
Okay.
But the challenge is they would try to troubleshoot symptoms. In other words, somebody calls in and says the paper's jamming. Rather than trying to figure out why the paper was jamming, they would just start changing paper feed parts, just kind of randomly. And like I said, and they weren't, machines weren't always in the shop. A lot of times they were out in the customer's office. So we're talking 4 or 5 trips sometimes out to the customer's office, and the customer's putting up with a machine not working. So I spent a lot of time with that. And then the other thing is there were things associated with managing service. There are consultants that had some metrics that didn't really work, because what really mattered was how long that machine went between copies. The longer it went, the less maintenance cost, because labor was the big piece of it. And like I said, there were people that would tell them they should, focus on calls per day and lots of other things, which didn't help.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
One of the things, even the dog thought it wouldn't help.
I was like, please don't. Oh, well, it is what it is. It's a live show and you get what you get. So yeah,
that's right.
I am dog sitting, so everyone's going to hear some dogs, but that's okay. So I was going to say, I'm like one of those where I like to find out, the deeper issues of what's going on with the photocopier. But I don't know what it is, but we all do the same thing where we just automatically pull the paper tray out and put it back in.
Sometimes that works. Sometimes rebooting it will work. My wife says all you have to do is
the Nintendo cartridge and put it back in.
My wife says all I have to do is stand near electrical equipment and it starts working. Because she'll be having problems with the computer and just really giving her fits. I'll walk from here into the living room and it'll be fine.
Of course.
And she just gets mad because okay, I don't like that. But
like, come look, it's broken. It's not working, and then you just walk by and it works fine. I've had the same thing happen to me too, and it's very humbling and it's very frustrating.
One of the things that while I was working with the dealerships, one thing I saw, and that kind of leads to some of the things we'll talk about, is their idea of training a new service manager is they'd walk up to their best tech. He was very skilled at fixing equipment. And they would tell him, you're the service manager. And then they'd turn around and walk away and hope he did okay. And the funny thing is they would never let him work on equipment without training, but they would let him manage a whole department of people without training. And it's like, that doesn't make much sense, And I saw service managers that they quit being a service manager and went back to being a technician. I saw them leave the company, lots of things like that. You're like, guys, stop, don't do it that way. Yeah. So I decided that when I retired, that what I would do is start teaching service management. And so I have a course I teach for service managers that's, you could say it's the equivalent of a college level course on how to manage technicians and how to make money in service and all of the things that they didn't get trained on so that they get better.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I always ask them is, what would they do if their building was burned to the ground? And I get this look.
The building isn't going to burn down.
They had no clue what they would do. And I'm like, okay, these are senior managers in their company, and they don't know how or what the steps are. And I'm like, that's really seriously wrong. And for a copier dealership, it's really critical because they have a guaranteed response time most of the time for their customers. And so if their building's gone and their computer's gone and their paper records are gone, what are they going to do? And so and part of it was I read a book. probably 20 years ago now, that talked about, it was for Security Plus training with CompTIA, but one of the things in there was a section on disaster preparedness. And it told the story, and I love this story. It makes so much sense. But it was about a limousine dealer in New York City that had just finished disaster planning, creating his disaster plan, and he was driving in New York City and saw the first of the Twin Towers fall on 9/11. And he immediately put his disaster plan into place. He called the leasing company, sent all of his vehicles back. He laid off all his staff, did everything he could to conserve cash and reduce expenses.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like that story.
No.
But so the end result of that is that when the thing started opening up post 9/11, then he had a pool of cash and he started buying up the assets of limousine companies that didn't have a disaster plan. And the result is he became one of the major players in New York City. And it worked very well for him, not so good for the people that didn't have a plan. And that's what triggered me asking the question about disaster plan.
Interesting. I am so sorry, but there seems to be, okay. I guess the neighbor dog just came over. I'm like on an acreage, so there's no fence. There's nothing to hold these guys in. So just a couple doors. So I apologize. So hope they'll be outside playing for a little while now. But that's interesting because it's very often like we had our little meeting beforehand, and I said, it's very often that we don't come up with a plan, like you said. Whether it's our own home or whether it's in a company, I think we're so focused on like the day to day, what's going on, what's happening. And then it's kind of like, we don't think about, just like an emergency, what's going to happen. So I know I was saying to you that, the kids in school, they'll have like the firefighters come. And then they'll be like, yeah, so here, does anybody have a plan for their home? And some kids may or may not put up, their thing. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. So sorry, the neighbor just came over and apologized for her dog getting out. This is, again, so sorry. This never happens because I'm not allowed dogs in my place. Okay. But yeah, so going back to, the firefighters come in to the kids' school and they go, yeah, do you have a plan? And it's usually not until then that some parents realize, yeah, we don't have a plan even in place at our own home. So that doesn't, there's no exception to the rule when it comes to a business. So when you have a business, are you the one that approaches the business saying, hey, do you have a plan in place? Or is it more frequent that they come to you and ask you for, some kind of a plan in place? How does that conversation start?
It's interesting because right now I'm having to talk to them, and I'm working on LinkedIn a lot, trying to create some awareness. I was in a meeting today earlier, and we were talking about it. And the one thing that the gentleman I was visiting with, he said, the problem is it's what you would call a quadrant 2 issue. It's important, but it's not urgent. And most everybody spends their life over in category 1, which is important and urgent. And so they don't spend the time and energy in quadrant 2 activities. But these are the things that make a big difference long term. It has to do with planning and preparing and working things out. And so part of my process right now is working on educating them. I've got a webinar coming up this week, and the first thing I'm going to do is, what would you do if your building was gone? Do you know what you would do? Do you have a list of things that need to happen? And I'll speak to the copier industry because it's easy for me to talk about it. Lots of experience there. But so we go back. Now they don't have any of the things they used to have. So they have things that have to happen very quickly. They need their phones transferred to cell phones. They'll need their a place to work. They'll need to make sure all their employees are safe, and that, find out what they have available in inventory and trucks. And then they're going to have to start, well, actually, before that, even they're going to have to get a computer and get it backed up. Hopefully they have a cloud backup or a good offsite backup. When I had my business and I was a real computer nerd, really believed in backing up and having the these verified and all those things. First time I needed to restore, we had to go back 3 tapes and lost a month's worth of data. Now, we were a small company.
Yeah.
We didn't have a lot of transactions, so it wasn't too bad. But for a large company, like, most of the copier dealerships, to go back and try to recreate that, especially if they didn't have their paper files, it is going to be very, very difficult to get recreated. And they have to make sure that the computer they buy has the hardware that the backup's going to require to make it work. Okay, so, and this is like in the first 2 or 3 hours of the day, after they find, after the event happens. So they're pretty busy at this point in time. And if they don't have that list made, they're going to be like, okay, what do we need? What now? Where? After that, they've lost all of their inventory, so they're going to need parts and supplies. Okay, and so that means that they need a list of parts and supplies to order, and they need to know who at the company they can call, send the order to, and they'll be able to cut all of the red tape and get something on an airplane headed their direction. And again, that's just a quick run through of some of the things that they have to have. You mentioned, talking about the firefighters at school. Companies probably should have fire drills once in a while. I'm not saying you do it every week. Yeah, but it'd be really nice so that everybody knows how to get out of the building. And here's a thing that a lot of companies don't think about, but it's becoming more important, is what do you do if you have an active shooter in the building? How do you get, how do you contain the active shooter so he can't get to, what can you lock off so he can't get to people? And then which way do you go to get out? Because it depends on where the shooter is, which way would be the smart way to get out. So those are things that they need to think about. But it's not just those things that are physical. What about your cybersecurity? What happens if somebody penetrates your network and accesses your customers' data? That's a serious thing. Hopefully you've got good cyber insurance. And the first step there is you call the cyber insurance company, because they'll tell you how to preserve your data forensic, so they can do a forensic examination, find out what happened, and maybe identify the culprit. And then they'll also tell you what you can and what you should say to people and what you absolutely don't want to say, because your choice of words at that point in time can affect the amount of legal liability you have.
Oh, that's so important. We actually, had a, like out of the blue, one of our public libraries had a cyber attack. And they did. They put out an email like ASAP, and said, what may or may not be compromised, and they're looking into it, and they're trying to keep, the customers calm and everything. And I mean, that's just a library. So you can imagine if it's a larger corporation that has, different information that can be leaked out, right? Like we heard of even the iCloud got hacked into and pictures got leaked out and stuff like that. So but they were good. They were prompt. They put out an email right away saying, that they're looking into what has been possibly leaked out, if it's sensitive or not, whatever. And then they were really good. They followed up, I think, within, if like a week or something, and said, no personal information was out there. So I think now, they were really quick on it, which was good. So I think that's one of the steps. I think that, and I'm not like at the library all the time or whatever, like it's been a while, but I was like, okay, cool. But if there's people in there getting books all the time or something, they might be a little bit worried. I don't know.
Yeah. And we'll come back to that in just a second. So the other cyber issue is, what if they get a ransomware attack? And probably 6 months back now here in the United States, I don't know if it affected Canada, but they had the automobile industry. There's some major providers that did take care of like the service records and stuff. And a lot of the dealerships had to go back to using paper records. and they had, the stuff they had, they couldn't order parts. I mean, it really put a stop to that industry. I mean, I have a friend that worked in that industry. He said it was just terrible because they couldn't do anything the way they were used to doing it. If you wanted to order parts, it was find a parts order form and put it in that way, and then somebody called the vendor, and and had to write it down. All of these things that were normally automated just stopped working.
Yeah.
And so that same kind of thing is a risk for just about any industry.
Wow.
And going to communications, one of the things that I help people do is build up a template of like press releases and things, because anything that happens, pretty soon the press is going to want to know something. And it's a whole lot better if you know exactly what to say, and you just have to fill in a couple of words, and you can send it out as an email or something, rather than you've got a reporter there with a mic in front of you, and you're saying, and I don't, because if you don't know what to say, what are you going to do? You're afraid to put your foot in your mouth, and the reporter wants answers. So again, all of these things are just a matter of thinking through the steps. But for a lot of people, there's two things that impact it. First of all, they don't necessarily have that process in their mind. I'm one of these people that is curious, and I like to think through scenarios, and so I'm like, okay, what happens if this happens? And then the other thing is they're so busy and working in their business that they don't have time to work on.
Yeah, the day-to-day, doing just your ordinary thing. You don't think that these emergencies will happen, right? It won't happen to me. I'm good, I'm safe, whatever. And then all of a sudden, like your own house going on fire. Oh, what happened to me? And then all of a sudden, it happens. So,
Let me give you a really good example of that. Just recently, I said recently, last fall. Now time flies when you're my age. But Hurricane Helene caused tremendous destruction in Asheville, North Carolina, which is up in the mountains. Nobody ever thought they'd have any problems from it, but it just about destroyed the town. It caused problems for the copier dealership. It caused problems for probably most of their customers.
Wow.
And that's just another piece of it, because if a disaster is widespread enough that it affects your customers significantly, that's going to be hard on cash flow, because if your customers aren't generating revenue, it's going to be really hard for them to pay you. So you have to think about that. I talked to a gentleman that that was in New Orleans during Katrina, and he talked about, he wasn't in New Orleans, but he was out in the area around New Orleans, and his building got flooded, and they didn't have a lot of the communication things, and they had built up a back channel using a private Facebook group, so that they could communicate with their employees, easily in the event that, their main channels of communication were gone. And there they had problems with cell towers being out. So many things went, because of all the damage that happened. It did work out for that dealer, though, because they were prepared and had a plan in place. And so the result was, as things started coming back to normal, they would go out and pick up new customers that needed something taken care of, because the customer's other normal vendor was out of service. Again, it's one of those things that those that are prepared can seize the opportunity. Those that aren't prepared suffer.
Right. And even the LA fires, we can talk about that as well, because that was more recent, and that was that was more residential type of area. But within residency, there are usually outside businesses that kind of, do reside maybe on a main street close to residential areas. So, if they're affected, at least for them, they were probably close enough to some other, businesses that they do work with, that they could go and say, hey, this happened, and can you take on our business? So what do people really do? Like, do they, how does one put this in action? Like, what's the very, very first step? Like, what do we do? Do we write up our plan, obviously, right?
Well, the very first step is you categorize your risks.
Okay.
Yeah, you say, okay, what are the things that are possible, and then what are the things that are most probable, and then which ones are going to have the biggest impact? Because we actually want to start the process with mitigation. In other words, what can we do to minimize the amount of impact this has on us? So, making sure that we know what's in our computer and how to, and actually having tested the process of backing it up, because you don't want to walk through that for the first time when when the world's gone to pieces on you. Yeah, you want to be able to walk in and know how to do that. You need to. So you start to build out this plan, but you identify the things that you can make better, things that you can do to reduce the impact. So good backup's a piece of that. The next thing that you want to do is you start looking at, okay, if it does happen, how do we recover? What are the most critical steps? And you've really got to walk through and think through all of the pieces of it. I'll go back to just another piece. We talked about ordering those parts and supplies. Well, you don't have a building. The plane shows up with parts and supplies. What do you do with it?
Right.
Oh, well, better go run a storage unit.
Everyone's houses,
okay.
everyone.
Okay, so yeah, well, that too, I guess. But you rent a storage unit, but you can't just pour it out on the floor. So now you need shelves in the storage unit.
Oh, yeah.
It is thinking through all of these pieces.
Oh my goodness.
And it, again, it's just, it becomes pretty easy once you've thought through the process as many times as I have. I can walk in and say, hey, okay, let's, okay, here's your risks. And some places will be in a floodplain, some won't. Some places will be at high fire risk, and some won't. So you think about, okay, what is it? A good example is I have a dealer that I used to support in North Carolina, and they had two locations. One was pretty high and stayed pretty dry. Another one was pretty close to where it could get flooded, and I think they had water up to the front door. On the outside of the front door.
Yeah.
Again, so it's really close, and was their main facility. So what happens if that if the water starts coming in? What do you do? Obviously you can do some sandbagging and some things to try to minimize that. But again, you got to make sure you have the sandbags there just in case.
Right. Everybody lay at the front door.
Yeah. Well, they just put me down at the front board. Got this big fluffy boy. We'll just use him to plug up the leak.
All the employees that don't get paid enough. You're all getting a raise, and everyone lays at the front door.
But
on top of each other.
Yeah, like I said, it's just thinking about these things, and maybe you have to have a little twisted mind that can see the dark side. I don't know what it is, but I'm like, okay,
I'll help you with that.
Look, okay, here's what we're gonna do. Here's what we're gonna think about. But the other piece of it is the one thing about having the disaster plan is it can't be on a piece of paper inside the building.
Oh, that makes sense.
Makes it a little difficult to walk down. It should be on every manager's phone as a document, and it should have the phone numbers and the names and every piece of what they need to do.
Yeah.
So that that they can start to implement. If they're the first on the scene, they got to call. There should be a disaster response team within the company that the people take the lead. So you'll need somebody for logistics. You'll need somebody for communications. You'll want somebody, the overall incident commander. So those three people got to get the first phone call. So that now they can start working on. Everybody should have their own separate list, and they can start working on it to start to get things in place. Again, and all of these are things that have to happen so quickly.
Right. So even with going back to the LA fires, if they are in the vicinity of things kind of happening, they can be able to start the procedure like right away and go, okay, what's the first step? And it may not be that you cannot fireproof your house, your building. Sometimes you can't do that. So then they can get on the phone and go, hey, okay, we need to, if someone's at the office or whatever, and the fire isn't there yet, but they can start taking some stuff out and taking it maybe to their house or something, and then calling and the insurance and going, hey, this is going to hit our place or whatever, and then go and get some stuff in, just kind of in line to begin with, right? So, oh my goodness. Yeah, you just don't think about that. You really don't. So having it in place, just even before things, because you don't even know what can happen. Like, up here in Canada, we don't really get, tsunamis or anything like that, but we've had floods, close to our rivers and things like that. So now I see our city, we had a flood back in 2013, and man, it's the 2015. So it's been over 10, 12 years now. and they're still building up the banks of the river, and they're putting measures in place to stop the flooding or whatever coming in. And now, like, after the flood, people were selling their places along that drive, one of the main drives of where that flood happened. But, some people just rebuilt or did whatever. But it's like, now the risks of where you're living, and you can put those measures in place to at least go, hey, okay, let's buy some sandbags, and no one has to lay at the front door.
Well, it's funny because in Florida, these people that live along the beach, they just rebuild. In fact, in North Carolina, it's bad too. I was watching the other day. There in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, the beaches are getting eroded, and houses are just falling off into the ocean. You see them floating away. And it's like, okay, why did you not move? I mean, it's like, why? But anyway, people do.
Perhaps because they don't think it's going to happen again, maybe that quickly, or they just love the location so much that they are willing to risk it. I mean, you could rebuild. You can also put, like some put up more struts on their houses, like in New Orleans. They build up a little bit more, or I mean, like look at Venice. They're all on waterfront, so what do, right?
Yeah, the whole city there sinking into the
whole
ocean.
Basement's just like, water can go underneath it, whatever. However, it's I mean, there's ways to do it. So, or maybe if they're lucky enough, they can build a little further back on their property, right? Not quite up front, but
not quite as close to the water. And it was interesting because when we were there, we actually saw them where they were building. They build up these sets of piers, and they would literally lift houses up and set them on top of pilings, maybe 10 foot up in the air, and then they put an elevator or a staircase or something to get up there, just so that they didn't flood. They literally raised their house like 10 feet, and that's great as long as you're not right by the ocean. It probably keeps their house safe.
Right, exactly. So when people when they order your service, they ask for your service. So you come in and you sit down with them and you set a process up, or do you do seminars for businesses? What is your actionable steps for people?
Normally what I will do is we'd set up, depends on where it is. If it was in town with where I live, I'd go drive over there. But because I can offer this service pretty much anywhere in the world, typically we're going to start up with a Zoom meeting, and we're going to talk about, and I have some tools, some of them that I've created, and some of them are just publicly available, where I can find out what, the things that are potential threats. Again, part of it is you just read the news and what's happening there, So for example, in like Israel or Gaza or some of those things, you got to take into account terrorists and, a lot of other things, it all changes depending on where people are.
I never even thought about that. It's what people deal with in different parts of the country, like different, just like, because you're in the States and I'm in Canada, so there's even differences just there. But never mind third world countries or whatever, like there's major things like maybe we would worry about a bank getting robbed or a business being robbed, but you never really think about like terrorists happening like that. A whole another level of security. Like, you
can go back to 9/11. Nobody expected that, and it's those are the things. Is some of those things you would rank as being very low risk, but you would still probably want a what if.
Yeah.
Just to say, okay, it's again, it's better to think through the scenario. And once you've thought through it, the nice thing is I am sure that this gentleman in New York City didn't have a plan for somebody blowing up and blowing or knocking down the Twin Towers. I'm sure that wasn't his plan, but he had a plan that if things went really south, here's the steps to take. So he was able to use what he learned in the process and to go ahead and figure out what's the best course of action given what I see right now. And so there's a lot to be said for just going through the process and thinking about it. I'm a huge fan of management teams working together to think their way through things, because what affects the service department may not affect the warehouse as bad, may not affect the sales guys at all. It all depends on a lot of things. another kind of catastrophe. And again, we don't think about it, and hopefully it doesn't happen again, but pandemic.
Right.
You look at what that did to business, and how hard it was for some businesses to survive.
True. And it did change, and we can still see to this day how a lot of businesses did change. And, even for myself, like I was very lucky because all my radio shows started, I was able to do them through Zoom, like just like streaming like this, so I can do them across the world, which, I was lucky to do that. But still, like, they were very quick to change, a lot of them, to, like the door-to-door service or come and pick up, for example. But they did, like, and I think in some ways it was more or less a good thing, so that people, like, so they could utilize what we have for technology, and what we can do for each other, help each other out, whatever. And it made people think differently as well. So I don't think it was necessarily a bad thing, to say the least, on that end. But it did make us think differently, which is good, because I think we do need to go outside the box.
I would agree 100% with that, because we do approach things differently. There were, like I said, there were a lot of businesses it was really hard on, but we've adapted strategies now that will help us if it happens again. Most of us could, we go back to working from home. I was like you. I stayed home for, a year and a half. I didn't leave the house very much. We had Amazon bring the stuff we wanted, and we just didn't go anywhere very much. And it was funny, we're talking about how the days get confused for you, and timing and stuff. I just told everybody we're going to just start calling them day. There's no reason to have a Monday or a Tuesday, because every day's just like the day before it, and just like the day afterward, just day.
One of those days that ends with Y. That's and we just call them every day.
Exactly.
Okay, we're going to wrap up now. Oh, sorry. Finish your statement there.
No, yeah, we can finish.
Okay.
But I got to tell my Canadian joke.
Oh, you could tell.
So, yeah, I have to tell this. I can't. I have at least one Canadian joke. I might know one more, but I'll tell you this one. Does anybody in the audience know how to speak Spanish with a Canadian accent?
No.
¿Qué pasa, eh?
Hey, you have to add the eh.
Eh. That's what I said. ¿Qué pasa, eh?
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is good. I'm glad you remembered, because I didn't even bring my notes, because my notes were in my studio at home, because I was like, oh yeah, our interview is until March 29th. And so it was perfect. And I was thinking last night, and I was like, I know I had notes written down, and I was like, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. It'll all work out. So did.
That was fine.
The only thing not under my control are animals, and that's just how it is. And they do have kennels, and if I did lock them up, they would be howling and barking, and I was like, I'll take a risk. And I had the neighbor's dog come, and their neighbor come, and so anyway, it's all good. But again, it follows under things just happen that are not under our control, and we don't know, and what do we do in those situations? So, if I'm out here again, then I know what I can do.
Just smile and enjoy it. I can go back to lots of Zoom meetings that I've been in, where a cat would walk and frost in front of the camera, or climb up on somebody's shoulder. Dog crawls up in the lap. You just get used to it on Zoom. Things happen.
That's right. That's what the pandemic brought us, as well as some really interesting backgrounds and some interesting props and all the fun things, so we can just laugh through it and enjoy it. But it does tell us that things can always happen out of our control, and we can either grin and bear it and be prepared, or we can be the complete opposite. But I think in this case, having you on as this guest and making sure that we can have a backup plan, and things can be sort of under control when they're not under our control. So I appreciate all your time. Where can people go and find some information about your business? And we didn't even officially say what your business was, the official name.
Yeah, my business is 22nd Century Management, because I believe in preparing for the future. If you hadn't caught that yet, and it's 22secondcenturymanagement.com, 22ctymgmt.com, and I'm on LinkedIn. You can just look up Kenneth Edmonds, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Now, I'm not Kenneth Babyface Edmonds, because there's a very famous person that has my same name, except he has baby face in the middle of it. So
Right. I know. I tried tagging you on like Facebook and Instagram. I was like Instagram. I don't think came up with Babyface, but I did for Facebook, and I was like, I wonder if I should throw him in there, catch his attention. Maybe he'll be on the show sometime. Who knows? But yeah, so there you have it. Make sure you do find him, more or less on LinkedIn, and then again, the website is 22.
Yep, 22 century 22ctymgmt.com. I tried to make it as short as I could.
Right, perfect. Thank you so very much, Ken, for coming on this evening with me and going through all the things. I appreciate it so very much. And yes, if you guys have any questions, comments, feel free to put them below in the comment section if you're rewatching this, or reach out to Ken on LinkedIn by all means, or if you need to contact myself and I'll put you in contact with him, we can do that too. Just because he's in the States doesn't mean that you can't reach out to him via Zoom or whatever phone calls. Technology is so wonderful that you can reach anyone these days, so it's perfect. And he will set up a little strategy, little exit for your company with the security stuff. So I'm not going to say exit plan because that's a different topic, different conversation, but kind of in the same sentence where you do need to exit your building, he can help you do that. So,
yeah, we'll figure a way out.
Exactly. With that, I hope you guys have a wonderful, interesting, happy International Women's Day. I mean, the weekend isn't over yet. Ken, please thank your wife for coming on today and taking time out of her day as well. I do appreciate that. Thank her for me, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
I will do that. It's been a real pleasure being here. We'll have to do this again.
Absolutely. Okay. Have a great night.
All right. Good night.
There we have it, folks, here on Connected with Cari. Sorry for the interruptions, but that does happen when you have a live show going on. And yeah, I mean, that's just what it is. So hope you guys have a wonderful International Women's Day weekend. It's not like the day, but I guess today is the official day. But enjoy our weekend, ladies, and thank you for tuning in today. Rest, enjoy, have fun, and I will see you guys next week. Make sure you guys stay connected.